Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. I'm your host, Kiera Dent, and I have this crazy idea that maybe I could combine a doctor and a team member's perspective because let's face it, dentistry can be a challenging profession with those two perspectives. I've been a dental assistant, treatment coordinator, scheduler, biller, office manager, regional manager, practice owner, and I have a team of traveling consultants where we have traveled to over 165 different offices coaching teams. Yep, we don't just understand you, we are you. Our mission is to positively impact the world of dental, and I believe that this podcast is the greatest way I can help elevate teams, grow VIP experiences, reduce stress, and create A-teams. Welcome to the Dental Team Podcast. Hello, Dental Team listeners. This is Kiera, and you guys, today is a legendary day. I've heard about this legend for so long. I've seen them at other events. We've briefly met, but he finally is making it onto our podcast. You guys know I love lawyers, especially on the podcast, because I can ask all the questions and they're not charging me by the minute, but Rob's awesome. So I'm super excited to bring to the show Rob Montgomery. He has an incredible legal firm. They are a boutique law firm where they focus on counseling dentists and dental services to full range of businesses and legal matters impacting our dental practices. So he's been serving the needs of many dentists, dental practices for over 30 years. And I'm super excited because he's going to come on and he might say some things that are different than other lawyers. And that's what I freaking love. So he is part of the Dental Amigos. And I'm so excited to welcome Rob to the podcast. Rob, how are you today?
I'm great, Kiera. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like I said, I remember my first experience with a lawyer. Like I was real junior, Rob, real junior, and I didn't know how this worked. And I remember they'd like get on the phone and be like, "Hey, Kiera, how's your family?" And I thought they genuinely were like trying to get to know me. And then I got a bill and I was like, "Cut that talk. I don't want to, you don't even need to know me. Just tell me what I need to do." So it's always been real fun. But I kind of gave you an intro, a bio. I'm super excited because I just love to learn more about the legalities, especially with like DSOs and associates. And what do we even do with this? You have a license in 19 different states. You guys work all across the U.S. So that's kind of my bio. But anything else you want to add in, Rob, just to let the listeners know who you are, what you do specifically. And then I'm excited to get into the juicy like DSO associate world and all the things to not do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you characterized it pretty well in the intro there, Kiera. I mean, we basically do all of the corporate transactional real estate employment stuff that comes up in the context of a dental practice. I started my career as a litigator. We do zero litigation in the office now. I'm happy to report.
We'll talk about that maybe off air, maybe on air. We'll see. Because I am fascinated by litigation. I mean, I watch Law and Order and I'm like, I don't even know if this is really real. Okay.
No, it's not like that, unfortunately, or maybe not. So, I mean, I think, but as over my career, I started to get more involved with transactional things and become more of a business lawyer. And once you kind of get a taste of that, you look at litigation in a very different way, in that it's just becomes such a time and money resource drain that, you know, if you're wired to try to help people navigate through transactions and help them with their businesses, it's really hard to wrap your brain around the benefits of litigation. And we tell people, litigation is a last resort. When your back is against the wall and you have to do it to save, your practice or do things to save, further your well-being, and it's the absolute last resort, then you do it. So, but we get involved sometimes with counseling people that are kind of pre-dispute or try to avoid litigation, but I don't go into courtrooms anymore. And it's probably been over a decade since the last time I did. But we represent dentists in most major markets, really with the exception of California. My assistant told me she thinks I might have the Guinness Book of World Records for number of admissions, being licensed in 19 states. And number 20 is pending. One of my colleagues, Margaret Bowles, is licensed in 5. And, so between all of us, I think we're licensed in like 30 states, which I'm fairly certain is a record for an 8-person law firm. Yeah. But it's fun for us too. I mean, and you see it too with the national business. It's neat to see differences around the country, how people do things, personalities, and We kind of embrace that, and sort of like the New York deal is different than the Idaho deal, is different than the Texas deal and the Florida deal and the Boston deal and the Phoenix deal. And it's fun to have that exposure and just be involved with people all over the country. And it's what, electronic media and communication has allowed us to get beyond our initial footprint, in our backyard. And to really get out there and help people in a larger platform. And I think the other thing about our practice, to kind of tag on what you're saying at the outset, most of our clients are hiring a lawyer for the first time. And so that's in my legal world. I tell my lawyer buddies, and they're in disbelief that if we have the volume of clients who have never hired somebody before. And so a lot of what we do is really helping people and guiding people through the process and, helping them understand how to work with lawyers and how to interact and control and handle deals. And, this is not a lot of times too, and this is going to maybe be a segue into what we end up talking about today. When you're working in a transaction where you have somebody who maybe has never gone through a deal like a big DSO sale, and then you have basically part of the cast of Shark Tank on the other side, it's a challenge, and that's, we try to help bridge that gap and really help them and guide them through those transactions.
Which I think is really helpful because honestly, Rob, like I mentioned at the beginning, I literally did not know what the heck I was doing when I first started out as a business. Like you hear about needing a lawyer, but I just thought that was if I was getting sued. Like thankfully that's knock on some massive wood. I try to be a likable person. Guys, that's my best tip. That's what most of my lawyers tell me. Like, just be a nice person and you usually don't get sued. But I didn't realize that like you should have a legal team look over your employee handbooks to make sure like you're not getting employees suing you because you didn't have those state laws. So there were so many different things that I didn't even realize. So I agree. When I start with new practices and they're just starting out, I'm like, all right, we got to build up your board of experts and you need to have a darn good lawyer. But there's also, it's not just like a one lawyer fits all. You need to have transactional lawyers. You need to have employee lawyers. Like that was something that I really didn't know. So I love that you guys do that. I do have to go back to litigation. Is it true that if anything were to ever happen, because on Law and Order and all these other ones, they tell you don't say anything to the cops, always ask for your lawyer. Like, is this a true thing? I'm always thinking about like, should you always say like, I need to speak to my lawyer? How does this work? I just have to go down this rabbit hole for just a second and then we'll really talk DSOs.
I think so. I can tell you, I have never done any criminal law work as a lawyer. The last exposure I had to criminal law was in law school. But I guess, and my answer might be, it depends. There's sometimes that I think you have to deal with the police and answer questions, maybe in the DUI context, I'm not sure. But generally speaking, yeah, you want to have a lawyer present before you give any kind of statement. And that's the same thing in a criminal matter, Kiera, and also in a civil matter. Like sometimes you might think that you're doing the right thing when you are trying to resolve a dispute with an employee who is, basically what we would perceive as in a pre-litigation stage, where that employee might be lawyered up already and they're asking questions or making requests for accommodations, or they say they may have a disability or they need time off for certain reasons. And a lot of the laws in that regard are not intuitive. And here you are thinking like, I'm going to provide what I think is the right thing and the right practical solution. I'm going to try to be a good person. And you end up saying things that may be entirely counter to the law. And then you find out after the fact, like, well, did you say that? Well, yeah, I did, but I didn't understand. Well, no, I mean, that doesn't matter. So yeah, you got to be careful, because once you say something or do something, it sticks, and it's hard, as we like to say, to put the genie back in the bottle. Especially when you've made statements like that, that to either in emails or texts. There's so many ways that we casually communicate that basically end up in the permanent electronic record, that when they get hauled out in front of you and shown to you, you would regret saying. So when we did litigate, and I litigated for dentists during my career, for 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had clients that were accused of discriminatory conduct, the other lawyer pulls out, the personnel file where there are statements in there that they wish they had not made, and that's really, and some of that is just like a business owner maturity, realizing that, hey, this is something, it's time to call the lawyer, better call Saul, right? It's time to call the lawyer and get them involved so that I don't do something that, I later regret, or say something that I later regret.
So on that same note, I promise, guys, we're getting to DSOs and associates. I just love to hear like the other side of the legal side. What would you say, coming from litigation, representing a lot of dentists, what are maybe like 1, 2, or 3 things that you feel in the litigation world? And then we're going to go to DSOs and associates because that's, more business chat. What do you find that if you represented so many, you went into litigation, like you got to the court cases. What are things that dentists or practices could do to prevent getting there from your perspective? I know you mentioned business maturity, but are there any other things that you saw consistently that you're like, if I could coach them or if I could give them guidance, this is what I'd say to new practices or existing practices to avoid litigation in the future?
Yeah, one of the main things, is in the HR context, as you said, the importance of having a good handbook, and then following that handbook. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of, my payroll company gave me an employee handbook, and it's 70 pages long. Did you read it? No. Right. Who wants to read that? It's boring. It's not relevant to my business, really, which is oftentimes the case. They don't say that last part, but I know that's the case. And then you find out that there are things in that handbook that are completely 180 degrees different from what the actual practice is. So, for example, if you have an employee handbook that's prepared by someone that just gives you this template document and there's no participation from you in the drafting of that, it may say that before you fire somebody, you have to give them some sort of peer review opportunity to explain themselves. Well, nobody's doing that in the dental practice context. And then when you go ahead and you terminate somebody and you didn't follow that, and then the lawyer hauls out the handbook and says, well, here on page 20, policy 17 says that this is the way you handle these types of disputes. Did you do that? No. Why not? Because, and it just doesn't come off well. So that's one major thing. The other thing is, we'll stick with the HR side, because a lot of the litigation that came up that we helped people with over the years was HR driven, is that, you really need to document things. So if you have an employee who's not performing properly, they're showing up late, they've been reprimanded, you need to have a documentation of that. And because if you go and say after you've been sued, well, this was a lousy employee, and the lawyer for the plaintiff gets the personnel file, and they start flipping through that at the deposition of the principal, and they say, well, if they were such a lousy employee, why is there no record of you ever telling them they were a lousy employee? Well, I told them one day. What day? I can't remember. What'd you tell them? I don't exactly remember. Who was there? I forget. Did you write it down? No. All right. Now all of a sudden, the person who is being deposed is sued, the practice owner, looks like, a liar who's violated the law. And I think that a lot of people don't realize, and this might be the best takeaway when it comes to all this litigation stuff, they think that if they are a good person and they're not doing something intentionally to violate certain laws, then how could they possibly be liable? Mm-hmm. And, that doesn't really matter in the legal world, because it's the perception of wrongdoing that gets you in trouble. Whether you're talking about soliciting patients, violating those types of non-solicitation provisions, or terminating people for discriminatory reasons. Just because you are not, a discriminatory person doesn't mean that you can't do things that somebody can then portray as discriminatory conduct, and so people seem to get caught up in like, hey, I'm good, I didn't do it for the wrong reasons. Yeah, but it sure looks like it. Mm-hmm. And whatever was in your head doesn't matter, because ultimately a jury is going to hear it and they're going to decide based on that evidence what they think was in your head. And that could be very different from what actually was. So just because you are good and on the up and up that is not a pass or a defense in anything that ends up in court.
Interesting. That is so fascinating. So when you do document, and this is something I've always been curious on, when I'm documenting about an employee, do I need to have that employee sign off on it? Can I just have like a running log, like had a conversation with this person at this time, then I have them sign forms? Like I've always wondered, because I could go back as an office manager and write up about all the different things that this person did.
Right.
But I'm guessing it would probably be helpful if litigation were to ever come about, that there is documented where they know what we talked about, they signed off on it. Is there anything that you know on that? I know I really do want to talk about DSOs. I'm just fascinated by it. You went to litigation like that. I feel like that's so fun to hear about. I hope I'm never there, but how does that documentation work out? Like, do you need to have it signed, or can you just have a running log?
It all depends. It depends on the severity of it. It's important to be consistent with this stuff. Like if you have one employee that you don't like and they're the only ones you ever document stuff, like that doesn't look good. If you have one employee that you don't like and they're the only ones that ever sign off on something, that doesn't look good.
Sure.
Look, ultimately, when you talk about resolving HR issues, the goal here ultimately for a business owner is to try to get that person on the right track. I mean, the time and the investment in getting people trained is enormous. Right. Like as a business owner, you want that person to succeed, So these discussions are, and sometimes this might be cause the problem. You're not necessarily creating the paper trail for the basis for the termination. Ultimately, you want this person to improve.
Right.
They've been with you for 3 years. You've spent X thousands of dollars and time trying to get them to be a good member of your team. You want them to come around.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't want them to walk out the door, to leave you, to go try to find a replacement, train that replacement, and go through that whole learning curve. So ultimately, sometimes people, need that wake-up call, like, hey, I'm not doing the right thing. I'm not showing up right. I'm not documenting things properly. I'm not following office protocol. And guess what? It was serious enough that the practice owner told me I had to sign this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I need to get my act together.
Sure.
Instead of, hey, it's, let it go. And I think a lot of people fall in this category. Nobody wants to have that difficult conversation. Right. And then you get to the point where you've told somebody 20 times and now you become the volcano where you just erupt and say, get out.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really, from a legal standpoint, that's not good. But from a business standpoint, is that really the best way to manage your team, to try to empower somebody to improve and change, to become a contributor and help better and raise the the whole quality of what's going on in the office? Like, no, that doesn't work. So
Sure.
I think that there's a compelling business reason to do it too. And again, some things might require that are more sensitive and more serious, the sign off, and other things like, hey, guess what, you were late. We document the fact that you were late.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something, if it happens every now and then, that needs a sign off. But
Sure.
You need to have a contemporaneous record that you could say, this is how we do this. This is how we document it. When it happens, I put this file in the note in the file, and we do that consistently. And on this date, it happened. I wrote it up on this date, which means I know it happened on that date.
Sure.
And these people that witnessed it, and this is what was said.
That's super helpful. And guys, for me, these are always the conversations I love to have, because even though it's not so fun and it's annoying to have to do, I'd rather know this information now than having to try and figure it out later when I'm in hot water. So in that same vein, let's talk about associates and DSOs, because I know that's more your specialty than litigation now. Okay, I'm going to go dicey with you, Rob, because I just feel like, why not? There is a hot debate that I'm hearing of associates. And do you hire them as a W-2 or a 1099? And it's hot. And I feel like there might be a lot of other things around this whole, like, what do I need to do when I hire an associate? But I know this is something I'm still hearing. And I've heard some like whisperings of what's going on. You're the legal side. You're the legal expert. So talk to us a little bit about associates. For sure, I want to know W-2 versus 1099 from your perspective. And then anything else we should consider when we're hiring these associates, because I feel they're a little bit bigger of a hire than per se just a team member. So what are some of the things you see to consider when we're hiring these associates?
Okay, sounds good. Both these topics are things that the dental amigos like to talk about. My co-host, podcasting co-host, Dr. Nacho, Paul Goodman, is very invested in the associate space and mentoring associates, and also practice owners that are hiring associates. So it's something that he and I, and I'm not just saying this, we talk about this stuff. We used to talk about it before we had the podcast. That's why we had the podcast, so that the conversations that the nerdy conversations, or we're geeking out on this stuff, we can share with an audience.
Yes.
We would talk about this stuff even if we didn't have the mics on. And that's,
why not hit record? Give a little extra value to the world.
So yeah, we're sort of like, dental legal management geeks who are buddies and share that. So we do talk about this stuff a lot. First thing, W-2 versus 1099. The 1099 characterization or classification is almost never appropriate in a dental practice.
Okay, can you say that again? Because so many associates are pushing for this 1099, and I'm like, I don't understand how you can think that you're a 1099 when you show up to a job at a set time and work with their employees, and like the patients are there. To me, that's not a 1099, especially where Uber and Lyft were getting sued for their 1099s, and I feel like that is the definition of a 1099. So yeah,
right. Well, I'll tell you who the 1099 is. The IT guy. When there's a computer problem, the IT guy comes and fixes it. It's nothing to do with the core business. It's an ancillary service for the business. They set their own hours. You don't tell the IT guy how to fix something. That is an independent contractor. A general dentist working part-time in a general dentistry practice, or several, is not an independent contractor. They are a part-time employee. Okay, as you said, you set the hours. They're core to the business. You provide the supplies. Tell them who they're going to treat. They are, in every sense, an employee. Now, when you look at sort of what does that mean, what we're talking about is risk with misclassification, and so that comes up in a few different main ways. One is, how does the government, the tax authority, the IRS look at this? And obviously the government has FICA and Social Security and Medicare withholding for a reason, right? So they want to make sure they get their money, right? And you can't just say, guess what, government, I decided to call this person a 1099 instead of a W-2. No money for you. Doesn't work that way. So there's a risk with that. And I can tell you that the cost of dealing with fines for failure to withhold payroll taxes can be really extreme. We had a client many years ago who was the victim of payroll fraud, where their payroll was a mom and pop payroll company, basically stole all the money instead of paying it to the IRS. So they took it out of my client's account, and it didn't make it to the government. That was like a $300,000 or so debt, the principal. Within like 2.5 years, that became like $700,000. So between interest and penalties and fines and everything, those numbers go fast. So the responsible party there is the practice owner. So if there's liability, it falls on the practice owner. The other potential problem is unemployment compensation. So what happens when you, as a practice owner, terminate your 1099? And they go to collect unemployment, and the unemployment people say, who are you? We don't have you in the system. You work where? And then, so again, that comes back to the practice owner. And then the last main thing is workers' comp. What happens if this 1099 gets injured on the job and they're not part of your workers' comp insurance? Again, massive penalties, vary state to state, but not a good scenario. So generally speaking, legally, the risk of the liability risk is on the practice. Unless there's a contract, the associate agreement says that the associate agrees to indemnify the practice for any liability arising out of this misclassification. In which case, indemnification is somewhat like an insurance term, right? Your malpractice insurance indemnifies you, your homeowners indemnifies you, your car insurance indemnifies you. So that means that you now are agreeing to basically insure the practice for somebody coming after them for this misclassification, which could be a complete game changer. So they're the reasons, the liability reasons. The practical problems from an associate standpoint, though, is what happens when you're not withholding money or having money withheld from your paycheck, you definitely have to do a lot of tax planning.
Right.
And because you don't want, if you're making, whatever, $200,000 a year, and then all of a sudden April rolls around and between state, federal, local taxes, you owe, well, $80,000, like that money's got to be someplace. So, you've got the BMW lease, the trip to St. Bart, the trip to Vail, and, maybe no money to pay the taxes. And so we've seen young dentists who've had tax liens going to look to buy practices or do startups, and they can't get financed. Like, well, how does somebody who's in their early 30s end up with these IRS liens? That's because they didn't manage that process properly. So that's something that's negative. And then, the other thing is that while a 1099 may allow you to expense certain business expenses, they still have to be reasonable, and so it doesn't mean that you can put your home cable bill through your business and write that off, though I might guess that some people try to do that. So it doesn't give you this sort of like carte blanche to just charge everything to the business and pay less taxes on that. But there's also something called the self-employment tax. So as a 1099, you are responsible for both sides of FICA. So Social Security and Medicare, the employee contribution, as well as the employer. So if you're an employee, you may have 7.5% deducted from your check. As a 1099, you might be responsible for 15.
Hello, Dental Team listeners. This is Kiera, and you guys, how was your 2022? I want you to look back and tell me, was it the year of years, or was it a really hard year? Did you crush it, or did it crush you? This is the time, guys, for end of year. Dental A-Team Platinum is welcoming you, where we will physically fly to your practice. We will come and we will elevate your dreams and make them into a reality. And guys, space is limited and prices are going up. This is not a sales pitch. This is not something where I'm trying to scare you into it. I'm just facing the reality of inflation is here, flights are expensive, and I want to see as many people as we possibly can and serve as many as we can. So if you want to be part of our elite group of people, there are limited spaces because our consultants can only see as many. We are taking on 10 new platinum offices by the end of the year, and that's it. That's all we have space for. So if you want to be one of the elite 10, come join us. Be a part of our top-notch elite doctor community. Be a part of our office manager and hygiene and front office communities. Get your operations manual done and live the life that you've only been dreaming of today. Email me hello@thedentalyteam.com and make 2023 truly a year that's unforgettable. We are a complete tax write-off. And like I said, we are only taking 10 offices. So don't get left behind. Be one of those 10. And I cannot wait to give you the biggest, warmest welcome to completely and utterly changing your life for good. Welcome to the Dental A-Team. I can't wait for you to join us. hello@thedentalyteam.com. Cheers to 2023 and making you your best self yet. Right. And I don't think people realize that, Rob. So often, I think that they are 100% not realizing it, not seeing that there's a lot more. Because I know as a 1099, I didn't realize how much was actually coming out with taxes. I didn't realize how much was being paid. And I remember my first tax bill as a 1099, and I wanted to cry my eyes out. Wanted to have all these different things figured out. And so that was something that was very terrifying for me that I don't think a lot of people see. I know most of the allure, from what I understand, is you get paid, quote unquote, the full amount. You get paid a higher amount. But you forget that most humans aren't responsible with their money. And when that tax bill does come up, it's much higher. So all those different pieces, I didn't realize that self-employment tax. I didn't realize any of that either. So I'm super glad that you talked about the 1099 path. I had not realized that you could do that. Indemnification, I think is what you said, and honestly, that'd be so terrifying as an associate. Don't say yes to that. That's a bad deal for you. But as practices, if they really do have that associate who's super gung-ho on wanting to be a 1099, that is a solution for it. So I think that that's great. I am curious when it comes to equity, because that's another big conversation that I feel happens all the time with business owners and practice owners, and they hire these associates and they want to have equity. And I've heard a lot of different ways to do this. You can do phantom equity. You can have these bank accounts where they put money in it and they only get it after they've vested for 2 years. I've seen other ways where you scale up. I've heard from some people that you have to do 50-50 if it's ever going to work out. I've heard from others that it should be like 10% in the mothership practice and then maybe 50-50 in another one. Like, equity feels stressful for me. So Rob, what have you seen on this equity path that people should consider, especially because I feel like all these associates come in wanting equity, but I don't even know if they can. I don't think associates even know what this equity means or why they're doing it. So I don't know if you can shed some light on this whole equity conversation, because I know, like I said, so many associates really, truly are wanting equity. But as a business owner myself, I'm just realizing, I don't know, Rob, I built this whole business up and I don't necessarily want to give away equity, but I also don't want people to turn over on me. And I feel that that's this like tug of war people are having. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts around this equity.
So, I mean, you're probably talking about my favorite topic these days, Kiera, associate equity, and it comes up in a couple of different ways. I mean, I think, it's really important for the practice owner, whether we're talking about associate equity or hiring an associate too, to really have a realistic understanding as to what that means from a cash flow standpoint. And really the same thing from the associate standpoint. You really have to do your homework with any kind of major business decision. And the main homework being, what is this going to cost me? What's it going to cost me to hire an associate, to bring on a partner, to drop that bad PPO, right? Like you can financial plan for all this stuff. And what we're talking about is working with a good consultant, CPA, who can look at this and quantify the impact of that decision. And I think a lot of times people think, well, I'd like to have a partner. Great. Do you want to share all the profit with them? Yeah, that sounds great. But you realize that there's only so much profit in that pie. And when they become the partner, they get half of it, perhaps. And so the people that get into trouble with this stuff are the people that don't take that step of due diligence. And I like to tell clients that, if you don't take that step in any of these things, you're really just choosing what's behind door number 2. And when do you find out what's behind door number 2? Well, a quarter after the associate started, when it comes time to file your taxes for the first year of your partnership, or you've done this practice buy-in and you've borrowed all this money from the bank and realized that now, guess what? I bring home $10,000 less a month as a result of this. And they're like, wow, I thought that all business transactions were constructive and beneficial. Not necessarily. So with any of this stuff, the decision really should be driven by, at least in part, an understanding and a recognition of what the cash flow looks like. Because otherwise, you're going to be surprised. And surprises are bad in a lot of contexts. Surprises are bad in the owner associate model, because then you've hired somebody that you don't have enough production to be able to pay them what they need. And then you spend all this time training them, and now there's not enough patient load for them. And now you've taken time away from your practice to train somebody to do work that there's no work to be done. Bad. That's a bad thing. Same thing with the partnership. If there's an expectation that both of you are going to benefit from this financial transaction, and there turns out to be that there's really essentially a winner and a loser, well, very few relationships are built upon that sort of unhealthy foundation that somebody benefits at the expense of the other. Not tenable, not sustainable. So with all this, it's really important, I think, to understand what the economic impact is. Just like, it used to be back in the dark ages of baseball, they would say the manager, he's a good call. He manages by his gut feeling as to, who to put up in that situation. That doesn't happen anymore. It's sort of like, let's look at the statistics and here are the numbers. And this is the percentage and the probability of this person succeeding in this particular role guess what? They get the bat and they go up, because they've been able to quantify the likelihood of success there. It's the same thing with dental business decisions. What we're really seeing though, and this is something that's passionate for me these days, I think with the proliferation of DSOs who obviously need dentists to work for them. The bigger the DSO, they need associates too. And if it's a DSO deal where the practice has been sold and the sellers are no longer there because enough time has passed and they've moved on, these associates are obviously important for the DSOs. What better way to ensure that you will have an associate than to have them buy into the practice, right?
For sure.
It's like that is the ultimate stickiness. And with that, a lot of times associates are just buying themselves jobs. But what they don't realize are, all the strings that come with this. And so when you're looking at those types of buy-ins, especially, the cost and what you can expect to make after you service your debt, what are you really getting is really an important thing. And so, and a lot of them come with really bad restrictive covenants and non-competes. And again, if you have to pay $300,000 for a 25% interest of this practice, this one location where you practice, and you still owe the bank money on that loan over 10 years, and you're not really making more money, what happens when you want to change jobs? You can't just assume that you're going to be able to transition into something else that's more beneficial. So, from an owner's standpoint, having somebody as a partner can be a really good thing, because if you need that associate, you have enough production, you now know that you've got somebody else with skin in the game. But again, if the numbers work, and then from the associate standpoint, the numbers still have to work, but you also have to make sure that what you're really paying for, that you're getting something for that.
Which I actually love this conversation, and I love that you have it driven by numbers rather than by anything else. Are there any other ways, Rob, that you've seen? Because I feel like most practice owners don't necessarily want to do equity, but they're doing it because they don't want to lose an associate. Have you seen any other ways to retain associates without having to give up this equity swap? Because I feel like so many practice owners are beholden to this. I'm so thankful you talked about that, because I've got a doctor partnership trying to navigate. And I had to bluntly say, have you just considered how much money you're not going to take home next year when you have this associate buy-in? Like, in theory, yes, they're getting this big buy-in, right? So they're getting that money up front. But I feel most individuals are used to their paychecks. Yeah. And when that paycheck drops in half, even though you got a big chunk of money, you still feel that hurt. So are there any other things you've seen besides this equity swap to encourage associates to stay longer? From your perspective?
Yeah, there's really aren't a lot of things that are practically workable. I think that it's a good thing just to pay people well, and ultimately that's what people are interested in. I think that for better or for worse, there is a younger generation of dentists that don't have an expectation of owning practices,
right,
which is at a certain level of shame, and there certainly are plenty that still do. But I think that if you can provide other things in a good working environment and a place where people like to work, where they can make a lot of money. I hear we're talking to somebody today that, is an associate position, that they're making $375,000 a year. And I forget, they work 3.5 days a week and they like where they work. Not so bad, right?
Well, and especially with the newer generation who, they're looking at homes not selling because the new generation wants to be more mobile. They want to be more transient. They don't want to have their roots. Like, they're not looking at these 401k retirements. So I think that's interesting. But I hadn't thought about, you're going to sell, so you're going to lose money that way. Why not just increase their pay to something where they're probably not going to get offered that anywhere else, have an amazing workplace that could be a viable option. Now, of course, if someone wants to own and they want to build equity and things like that, maybe not as ideal, but I am going to pivot because I want to ask one more question. I know our time is coming up, but shoot, if I can have a lawyer on the podcast, I'm going to just ask all my questions, Rob.
Go ahead.
Okay, we've talked about associates, we've talked about HR. This one is coming of, I feel a lot of dentists are getting unsolicited offers from DSOs, where these DSOs are just hungry And then what happens are my dentists sit there and they're like, so Kiera, I got this offer from a DSO. Like, what are the pitfalls associated with these unsolicited offers with a DSO, with practices? What have you seen as some potential pitfalls as we wrap up today?
Yeah, I think one is that, if you don't have somebody that's representing you in those negotiations, you don't even know what to ask for. So they're not infrequently the people come to us and say, I've signed this letter of intent with the DSO, can you represent me? It's like, sure, but I really wish you had talked to us before. And representation can be with a lawyer, with a good broker that really understands the process, who's bringing in multiple parties. I mean, dental practices are tricky to value. And, if you are working with somebody that brings in, depending on where you are in this country, where there might be a lot of DSO demand, there may be 10 or 15 groups that may be possible suitors here. The only way that you know that you've gotten the best deal is if you've fielded offers from them. And all these DSOs, just because we talk about DSOs, they're not all the same. Different ones offer different things, different deal structure. And so when they approach these dentists with these unsolicited offers, the dentists, again, don't know what they should be asking for and what to look for. But inevitably, it's like the top line of the LOI is, we're going to buy your practice for $4.1 million. Holy smokes, that sounds great. I don't think they even continue to read, the rest of the document that says, well, 40% of it is going to be in cash, 60% of it is going to be in equity in this parent DSO that, we say it's worth this.
Right.
Like, well, it's not like it's stock in Google that there's a market and you can say parent DSO is worth that. Like, it's just like the board of directors decided that that's what it's worth. And that we're going to hold back, a portion of that purchase price to ensure that the indemnification obligations are met, or to adjust, the accounts payable that are due after closing. And then, you start to read down, and the more you get, it's like you just keep giving up and giving back things. And then I think one of the big sort of like ahas with that is that people don't realize, especially practices of certain sizes, like if somebody's going to pay you, let's do easy math, Kiera, $2 million for your practice, and then require you to work there for 5 years. And let's say that as an associate, after you've sold, you're going to make $200,000 less during that 5-year period. Well, guess what?
Bad deal.
They're paying you $2 million. It just cost you $1 million to do that. They're using your money to buy your practice. Now, sometimes these deals work okay. Sometimes they don't for that reason alone. So then when you start to look at that, and then you look at the fact that some of it's in equity in their business, some it's in cash, that number becomes even worse because you never walked away with the cash in the first place. So it's not like you even got the $2 million. You may have only gotten, let's say, $1.2 million, right? And then over a 5-year period, it cost you $1 million. So like over a 5-year period, with the sale of this practice, you're plus 200 grand and you own some, ambiguous interest in this business that has no market, that nobody even knows what it's worth, that you hope that when they sell someday, it means cash to you, which frequently it doesn't. You just get stock in the next one, that you're in the same boat and it never ends. Are there stories where this stuff works out? Yeah, sometimes, but more often than not, it doesn't. So, it's really understanding the deal. Again, doing the cash flow analysis. What is the economic impact? What is the cost of doing this deal? Being an associate versus a practice owner. What types of things are you giving up? What is the risk in understanding that? And again, if big DSO knocks on the door and throws this big offer at you, and you don't understand all this, you don't know how to negotiate that, you need more cash up front, you need provisions that they're required to buy your equity back. All these things you don't even know what to ask for. And then once you get into that LOI and you've got this exclusive deal with them, you may not be able to talk to somebody else for the next 6 months or 12 months even. And so, those, generally too, those unsolicited offers are not the best deal out there, and, just like anything, the DSO is not coming, if they don't have competition, they're not offering you something that is a competitive offer. And so, inevitably, if you are engaged with those people with that unsolicited offer, you're leaving money on the table. But they also like to kind of play. I say they, obviously these are generalizations, but I've seen it enough times where the doctor is having these conversations where it's all very casual. Don't worry, it's an LOI, it's non-binding. You don't have to follow through. But it's just the farther you go along, the more they get committed, and the harder it is to turn back for a variety of reasons. And frankly, they're very tricky transactions. We do practice transitions from the buyer side, the seller side. We help people that are working with DSOs. We help doctor to doctor deals. But even though, a sale of a dental practice to a DSO and there's a sale of a dental practice to a dentist, it's the same thing. You're selling a dental practice, but from a legal technical standpoint, Kiera, those two deals couldn't be more different. Like you're going to sell your dental practice to a dentist. There's going to be an asset purchase agreement. There's going to be possibly an employment agreement and maybe a lease if you own the real estate and that's not being sold. If you're going to sell to a DSO, you may have 20 different documents with the sub DPO equity agreement. You've got the rollover agreement, the operating agreement, and it's all this stuff. And frankly, in a dentist to dentist deal, that's a transition where you've got a buyer and a seller who are trying to work together to have a good outcome. In a DSO deal, they've got lawyers, and these are people that are the Shark Tank of the dental world, that there are all sorts of little traps in the documents that are purposely put there that require you to go through this stuff carefully, and you have to watch them like hawks, because if you don't, they will try to rip you off.
Rob, I think that you made a great case for why everybody should have a lawyer and a legal team. I'm like, guys, just don't make these decisions because, like, Rob, you are obsessed with reading contracts and finding out what we're really agreeing to. And I'm like, yeah, that seems pretty good. But that, I feel has cost a lot of dentists millions of dollars, a lot of time. And like you said, the $2 million and you're getting paid $200,000, like do that math. I can't tell you how much this podcast, I hope, is resonating of like, do the math, the numbers don't lie, and have a really, really good legal team on your side. So Rob, if people are interested, I know you guys do associates, you do associate contracts, you do DSOs. I know you're just a great resource in the dental world. You guys do a lot. I know Dr. Nacho, he's all about his associate. I feel like it's like his matchmaking. I used to do it, and I'm so thankful he does it now because I gave that business up. But if people want to get in contact with you, Rob, what's the best way to connect with you just to find out? Of course, guys, tell him Dental A Team sent you. I know Rob takes care of our Dental A Team family real well, but how can they connect with you?
Best way is to go to our website, yourdentallawyer.com. You can post questions in there, and if you've got a matter you want help with, put a little information in there, and then somebody from my team will get back to you with that. My email's on there too on the website. People tell you not to do that for spam reasons, but it's there. And so, if you've got questions, you can also email me directly, and we can see if there's something that we can help you with.
Awesome. Rob, it was real fun today. I appreciate you answering all my naive questions, guys. You learned what to do in Law and Order. Like, always ask for a lawyer. You've learned some HR things. We learned about equity and associates, the W-2 versus 1099, and then these DSO offers. I feel, guys, don't get sucked up by shiny object syndrome. Make sure you really do have a strong legal team on your side. I can't tell you how much more confident as a business owner I am having great legal representation of people I trust that I know are like they're sharks in the industry for me, for my behalf. They're going to bat for me. And then they also talk me off a ledge so I don't make dumb decisions. So Rob, thank you for your time today. It was so fun. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Kiera. It was great being on the show. We covered a lot of ground, more than I expected. So it was fun. I enjoyed chatting with you as always.
It's just my brain. I just want to know it all, Rob. So thank you for indulging. Guys, please reach out to him. Always reach out to us if we can help you as well. Email us hello@thedentalateam.com. We'll get you guys connected to Rob, but head on over to their website. And as always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Dental A Team podcast. And that wraps it up for another episode of the Dental A Team podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.